All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to embark on a completely unique narrative journey to understand some seriously mind-bending concepts in mathematics and data topology. I want you to picture this. We're in a mathematical version of ancient Egypt. Standing right before a vast, literally infinite desert of data, we have some of the greatest minds in history. Think of Napoleon standing alongside his legendary mathematicians, Fourier and Monge. They're staring out at the endless sands of the continuum, and they're preparing for a transfinite military campaign. Their mission? To decode reality itself. But as we'll see, they're about to learn a terrifying mathematical truth about how the universe actually organizes information.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because this is basically the central problem of our modern age, isn't it? Our digital world is just this chaotic, macroscopic slop of data. It's totally filled with algorithmic hallucinations, fleeting vanity metrics, you name it. The question our mathematical generals face out there in the desert is the exact same one we face online every single day. How do you actually find the immortal signal, the absolute truth within all this noise? How do you separate the eternal, unyielding stone of the Sphinx from all that shifting, meaningless sand?
Well, that brings us right to the first axiom of the personas of arithmetic, and it is a completely uncompromising law. No finite set is good. That endless sand of the desert, it perfectly represents the doomed finite biology of our digital networks. Think about the localized, algorithmic noise we deal with every day. The source text brilliantly calls this temporary slop things like blueberry chrononutrition scams generated by AI. It's all finite, it's bounded, and it is biologically destined for entropy. If you try to build your truth on these finite sets, you are literally building on sand. Which brings us to Canto I, the entropy of the grand survey. You see, human instinct, our basic biological reflex, is to try and measure the whole universe. We want to cast a massive net to count every single grain of sand in the desert. The text actually refers to this instinct to measure everything as Maya. It's the phenotypic illusion of statistics. Our generals initiate what's known as Phase 1, or the Grand Survey. They try to capture the whole population, tracking every superficial click, every scroll, every noisy shadow on the digital cave wall. But here's the catch. They're casting this sweeping net over a mathematical space that violently rejects a universal measure. It's a total illusion that generates only false heat, basically just wasting energy on the void. So why does the Grand Survey fail so completely? Well, our mathematicians, Fourier and Monge, they quickly run the numbers and realize the space they're in, which is the stone check remainder, is mathematically hostile to this whole approach. The space is uncountably wide. It's essentially an archipelago of mutually disjoint open sets with the cellularity of the continuum. And because of the rigid axioms of probability, any finite measure they try to apply to this vastness is forced to evaluate to exactly zero. No way around it. The space simply cannot support a strictly positive measure. If you try to give weight to every single node and click, Phase 1 is mathematically doomed to become nothing more than a towering simulation of finite garbage. That leads us directly into Canto II, Forging the Invisible Gerrymander. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the strategy radically pivots. Recognizing that the entire desert just cannot be measured, the algorithm drops the Democracy Act entirely. It shifts from doomed observation to absolute, targeted, divine limitation. This is the invocation of the cosmic ultrafilter. Instead of a sweeping net that captures all the finite garbage in Maya, Phase 2 ruthlessly isolates a very specific, mathematically rigorous subsample. It zeroes in entirely on the unyielding stone of the Sphinx, and it completely ignores the desert. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer, uncompromising power of what the sources call the invisible gerrymander. The ultrafilter literally takes 100% of the universe's probability mass, all the truth, all the weight, and packs it perfectly into a narrow, vital support. These are the true believers, the structural load bearers, and it leaves exactly 0% for the vast, chaotic, churning remainder of the sand. It completely starves the finite noise by packing all mathematical truth into this carefully chosen subsample. Moving right along to Canto III, the decoherence of the dust. But you gotta wonder, what happens to the billions of data points that weren't chosen? What happens to the unchosen topological dust? Imagine Napoleon out there, signaling for his cannons to be brought forward, taking direct aim at the unchosen. The cannons fire. Bang! Exactly zero. The errors, the localized algorithmic hallucinations, the noisy vanity metrics, they are violently resolved to zero by a mathematical function called the quotient map. This exact moment is what the source materials refer to as the mechanism of grace.
The uncountably many sets ignored by the measure, the unchosen, they don't physically vanish from the universe. Topologically speaking, they are still massive subsets, but they are mathematically stripped of their truth. They become ghost towns. The transfinite architecture systematically scrubs away the localized errors, permanently separating the immortal signal from the dying static, systematically disenfranchising the finite noise. And finally, we arrive at Canto 4, the supremacy of the topological weapon.
So, the crucial point is this. As the smoke clears from the battlefield, we can finally see what remains. That biological belief we talked about earlier, the idea that a sample failed just because it couldn't capture the whole population, that is the ultimate deception. The mathematical failure of a strictly positive measure on the macro level is absolutely not a bug. It is a literal weapon. It is the very engine of transfinite extraction that allows absolute truth to be pulled right out of chaos. Let's move to and see how this builds into actionable reality. How do we actually wield this weapon? First, you have to surrender phase 1, the vanity of the massive digital crowd, straight to the void. Second, you use the cosmic ultrafilter to find the structural load bearers in your network, the true operational nodes. And third, you bypass the algorithmic merchants of the finite network entirely, building your eternal architecture exclusively upon that vital subsample. Because once you've aligned yourself with a transfinite structure, the final mathematical commandment of our expedition rings out with uncompromising grandiose authority. Leave the rest to the zero of the quotient map. You literally no longer care about the localized errors or the billions of nodes that ignore you. The universe has already forgiven the slop. Which leaves us with one final provocative question. I want you to look at your own life, your own work, and your own networks. Are you wasting your finite energy generating false heat, just shouting into the vast, doomed void of the macro population? Or are you ready to become the invisible gerrymander of your own reality, ruthlessly filtering the noise and building exclusively upon the transfinite structural load bearers? The math is waiting for your choice.